Africa over the past 24 hours. And for that, we're joined in the studio by Georgia Calvin-Smith. Georgia, over to you.
Thanks very much, Laura. This is Africa News. And the Congolese president heads to Kampala for rebel peace talks after East African heads of state meet in the Ugandan capital and agree on plans for a common currency. We speak about what's at stake, the OECD's Africa economist. Also, it's a big week for Central African Republic ahead of a UN Security Council vote on its crisis, and reinforced French troops start trying to make inroads into spiralling violence there. And as the US pledges hundreds of millions to finding a cure for HIV, we head to Ivory Coast for a look at how the illness is being tackled in remote communities there. First up, though, Joseph Kabila headed back to Uganda. The Congolese president's there for talks to revive a stalled peace deal between his government and M23 rebel fighters. After an 18-month insurgency, last month's agreement fell through at the last minute. Despite the M23's recent surrender, Kabila said that the fight against other militia operating in DRC's conflict-torn east is not over. Meanwhile, the UN's MONUSCO peacekeeping mission that's been backing Kinshasa's efforts to battle armed groups, for the first time says it's preparing to launch surveillance drones to monitor the movements of militia still in the volatile east. Well, over the weekend, Uganda also hosted the leaders of several other East African countries as they discussed working more closely together to boost the region's economic fortunes. Along with Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda and Burundi, Kampala signed up to plans to create a common currency within 10 years. But there's still a lot of challenges ahead before the creation of a monetary union. Well, Jan Rielander is an economist specializing in Africa. He joins us from the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. Jan, thanks very much for coming in. Now, if they pull this off, what are the potential rewards?
The potential rewards are a much closer region with much more potential for trade and I think a lot more attractiveness for investors. Well, when I say this, it's important to understand that these 10 years for monetary union will also bring about a lot more closer alignment of a lot of policies, be it in trade and fiscal areas, and hopefully also in infrastructure. And so that's what I'm really talking about, the potential to come together. And if these countries come together, that would be a market of about 140 million people today and a GDP of about $95 billion today. To put that into perspective, that's still just about a third of that of Nigeria or a quarter of that of South Africa. So you also see the need for the countries in this region to really come together and offer a common marketplace to boost investment and trade potential.
So they have a lot to offer each other, but at the same time, we're talking about, on one hand, you have Kenya, on the other hand, you have Burundi. They're going to face very different kinds of challenges in making sure that they can stick to whatever kind of fiscal commitments are required to make sure this happens.
Certainly. I mean, and the commitments that they've laid out is that they want to have an inflation limit of 8% maximum, which this year all of these countries reached, but just a few years ago, most of them had inflations of above 10%. So there's a lot of challenge here in macroeconomic management. And also debt to GDP ratios should have agreed to be around 50% of GDP and not higher. And while also all countries are reaching that at the moment, Tanzania, for example, has seen its debt to GDP increase by 10% over just 4 years recently. And then as you pointed out, Burundi has a per capita income of around $240 per capita compared to $800 in Kenya and around $500 in those other countries. So there are huge discrepancies between these countries, and clearly the others must make an effort to bring in Burundi, and Burundi needs to really boost its growth to catch up to Rwanda, which at the moment has the highest growth rate there.
So as things stand at the moment, does this harmonization goal seem realistic?
I'd say it's ambitious, but certainly realistic if we really see the political will come through to make this happen over the next 10 years. Countries will have to agree to also have all the liberties that come with Europe, with currency unions as in Europe. So you would have to have the free movement of labor. You would also have to have some sort of support between from a stronger country like Kenya for the other countries to help them catch up and remain part of this currency union. So clearly there'll be a lot of pressures on all the players to show their will to really work together on this.
Thanks very much. Jan Rielander there from the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development's Africa Desk. Now, on Monday, an extra 200 newly arrived French troops began the task of trying to halt the spiralling violence in Central African Republic. Both French and African operations plan on beefing up reinforcements there. The country's crisis is high on the international agenda too. A UN Security Council vote is due later this week before a mini-summit on Central African Republic to be held here in Paris over the weekend.
French forces are deploying in a bid to restore order in the Central African Republic. On Sunday, some 200 troops joined the 400 already stationed in the country, and hundreds more are expected soon. The move is a relief for many residents in the capital, Bangui.
The French have to be here to really secure the country. Not just Bangui, but all the provinces of the Central African Republic too. We need peace.
The country has spiraled into chaos since the Seleka rebels ousted President François Bozizé in March. France presented a draft resolution at the UN aimed at reinforcing the African-led force known as MISCA. The resolution under Chapter 7 would allow troops to use force to protect civilians.
I think that the forces that will intervene must be able to do so under Chapter 7. The troops must be allowed to use force to restore peace and security.
French troops are already patrolling the capital and preparing Bangui's airport for a military intervention. The country's instability will also be on the agenda during the two-day Summit for Peace and Security in Africa, held in Paris at the end of the week.
Hundreds more people are believed to have fled Nigeria's northeastern city of Maiduguri after a nighttime raid by militants reportedly left dozens dead. Officials say hundreds of armed jihadist members of the Boko Haram sect attacked an Air Force base and an international airport before dawn on Monday. Authorities in Borno State have since extended a nighttime curfew in Maiduguri to 24 hours. Thousands have died in attacks by the Boko Haram group since it launched its insurgency in 2009. Somalia's Prime Minister has been ousted by Parliament. A little over a year into the job, Abdi Farah Sherdon lost a confidence vote on Monday amidst a tense relationship with President Hassan Sheikh Mohammed. Now, there had been fears that infighting was undermining the government's ability to tackle the security threat posed by al-Qaeda-linked al-Shabaab rebels. Well, Sherdon will remain in office until Mohammed nominates a new premier, who will then have 30 days to appoint his cabinet. Now today, Monday, the 2nd of December, is the day when anti-slavery campaigners push that little bit harder to shine the spotlight on the challenges faced today in wiping out the practice of slavery. Now, the UN's anti-slavery diplomat headed to Ghana ahead of the date to urge the government to do what it can to protect the most vulnerable. Our Katerina Vitozzi was there. She tells us more.
Slavery should be put on top.
The UN's Special Rapporteur on slavery-like practices came to Ghana at the invitation of the government, an invitation that Gulnara Shanyan said reflected the government's readiness to tackle the problems of modern slavery, things like human trafficking, forced marriage and child labour. Now, despite what she said were good steps by the government to combat these problems, she stressed more still needed to be done.
It is very important that issues of child labor and issues of slavery should be put on top priority. We always speak about poverty as an issue, as an important issue that these issues cannot be addressed. But I think better management, political attention, political will, addressing this issue as a priority, because these are the people who are future of the country. Poverty would perpetuate if these issues should not be addressed in a comprehensive way.
The UN will present full results from this fact-finding mission early next year. But according to current UNICEF estimates, 1 in 3 children in Ghana under the age of 14 are engaged in some form of child labour. Now, as the UN marks its day for the abolition of slavery and slavery-like practices, reducing that number is key to making slavery truly a thing of the past.
Now, President Barack Obama has today announced that the US will be investing $100 million into research aimed at finding a cure for HIV. World AIDS Day fell on Sunday, and the impact of the disease is of global concern. Well, we head now to Ivory Coast, where efforts are being boosted in tackling the illness in rural communities. Our Nicolas Chemin has more.
This boy is 13 years old. He's from Abidjan and lives with HIV. This is how he sees his future life.
I imagine my life will be perfect, with a good job, with my close family, my friends, and everything else.
He takes part in support group meetings for HIV-positive teenagers. Cécile Traoré is a social worker who makes sure children take their medicine correctly, but she says they need more than that.
Adolescents need support, social, psychological, and moral.
Far from Abidjan, in the rural areas of Ivory Coast, doctors don't have enough data about HIV prevalence.
The national HIV testing rate is very low. Only midwives can carry out HIV tests in some rural areas, but there is no testing at the community level. It's a problem.
In all, UNAIDS estimates that some 450,000 Ivorians are currently living with HIV.
That wraps up Africa News for me, but we'll be back with more in an hour, Laura.
Georgia, we look forward to that as always. Thank you very much indeed for that roundup from Africa. And that's it for this part of Live from Paris. Do stay tuned, much more to come. Mark Owen with you right after this. Stay with us.